Check, 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 check. Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Block Sports. And I am your host, Michael Jefferson. And welcome again, everyone, to, as I said, another edition of Block Sports. It's great to be here for week one. We had week 0 a week ago. But guess what? Now we are in full-blown HBCU college football week. And I should say, what a great weekend we had for football. And for those of you who don't like football, I don't know what to say because I had a great weekend. But for those of you who want to try to get a hold of me and who want to reach me, please make sure that you reach me by going to the following location. For those of you, some of you may be watching via my website, but if you're not, you can go to my website at www.yourstreet.tv. That's www.yourstreet.tv, or you can get in contact with me by going to my email, and that is michaelj@jcconnect.net. That is Michael J at jcconnect.net. And either way you try to get in contact with me, I will try my best to get back in touch with you to make sure we respond to you and find out your needs, because you may be in need of me covering or producing your game or coming in to do a pregame show. And as a matter of fact, that's what we did at Jackson State, with Jackson State facing off against the Hampton Pirates. And as far as Hampton goes, they are the real HU. But I'm quite sure that Howard has something to say about that. But either way, great games all across the spectrum. And I don't know if you were able to go to any. I was able to go to two. And both of those games were exciting. Endings were great. And gosh, folks, all I got to say was, if you missed any of the games, go back and watch them somewhere, or listen to the games, or go back to each conference's website where they will have a wrap. And in some cases, they may even have a way for you to even watch the full game. If you can, what you can do is please go back and support and just go back and watch those games. Because I can tell you, as I said, I was there. Beautiful weekend. God blessed us with an absolutely gorgeous weekend, gorgeous weather. I mean, a little bit of sun, lots of sunshine, a little bit of wind just to keep it kind of cool, just to keep a nice breeze going, just so you wouldn't be on burn up. And that's the one thing I can easily say, because going from Indiana to the SIP, that's a different kind of heat, folks. And if you're not used to it, I'm just sorry for you. I grew up down in Mississippi. The only problem is I have been up in Indiana, or should I say up in the Midwest, a lot longer than I've been down south. And it takes a little bit of getting used to again. I saw everyone walking around, no issues, no problems. Here I am, I'm going back home, what I still call home, being Mississippi. And I'm sweating. And I used to march in that kind of heat. I used to practice in that kind of heat. I used to be in the band, in the stands, in that kind of heat. Full uniform dress. Not even think about it. Maybe every once in a while, just kind of unbutton just to let some air circulate. But for the most part, yeah, a lot of people say I was young and dumb. But guess what? We made it. And give me some water now, and I'm fine. But today, we are going to go back and talk about the 4 conferences football games from this past week. And let's go ahead and jump right into it. And I'm going to take about 30 seconds for each conference to talk about the predicted order of finish. I know I've talked about it ad infinitum, but this is the last weekend that I'm going to show it to you. I may talk about it periodically during the rest of football season, but this is the last time, probably the last time that you will see it. So for the next 30 seconds, I'm going to talk about it. Then we're getting into the scores. Here is the predicted order of finish, with Virginia Union and Johnson C. Smith, as well as Virginia State being the top 3 teams, followed by Fayetteville State and Winston-Salem State. And from there, everybody else just kind of falls into place for the CIAA. Now, when it comes to the scores, let's make sure I turn my ringer down on this just in case I receive a phone call. Now, for the CIAA, here are the scores from this past weekend, starting on Thursday night with, as you can see, Livingstone traveling to the University of Charleston. Unfortunately, they lost by a score of 39-10. Virginia State traveled to Barton College, and they were able to pick up a victory, winning by a score of 35-7. Games played on Saturday night. You had Lincoln of Pennsylvania traveling to Grand Valley State University, losing, unfortunately, by a score of 45-9. Shaw hosted Albany State from the SIAC, and they just took it on the chin from the number one team, the predicted number one team, or the projected number one team in the SIAC. They took it. Albany State just handed it to Shaw, defeating them by a score of 51-7. Johnson C. Smith hosted another team out of the SIAC, winning by a score of 45-10. So they were able to flip the script this time. But Johnson C. Smith was able to host Morehouse from the SIAC and winning by a score of 49-9. Next, Benedict hosted Fayetteville State. Guess what? Here we go again. Another one. And with Benedict coming in from the SIAC, and they won by a score of 10-0. Shawan, former member of an HBCU conference, and they won by defeating Elizabeth City by a score of 28-14. And Tusculum University traveled to Bluefield State and defeated Bluefield by a score of 49-23. On Sunday, August 31st, you had Virginia Union traveling to Miles College, another SIAC school, and Virginia Union was able to come out on top by a score of 45-3. But Winston-Salem rounding out the night in the Red Tails Classic, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. Tuskegee winning that game by a score of 20-17. So congratulations to the schools of the CIAA, for those of which who were able to pull out victories. But for those who were not, this is the beginning of the season. No conference games were played. So with no conference games being played, this was a way just to feel out where your school is, how well you are, how well you're playing, the people that you have, the players that you have that are starting right now. Are they good starters? Are they ready for prime time? If they're not ready for the lights, the glitz, and the glamour, then hopefully you got somebody in the back that can take their place. Because if not, you could be in for a long season. But if you have someone that could take that person's place, then maybe, guess what? When it comes to conference time, you might be in a good position, because some of these teams played very well in their non-conference games. But unfortunately, you had other teams like Shaw, who was defeated quite handily. Livingstone, who was defeated quite handily. Even though Fayetteville State did not score any points, I should say, they fared pretty well. But for the most part, we will see, and we shall see how everything ends up. But let's take a look now at the standings. And as you can see, for those that we talked about, you have 3 teams in the CIAA that actually won, and the teams that did not win, 0-1. There were 2 teams, of course, as you can see, Bowie State and Lincoln of Pennsylvania, that did not play. And as a matter of fact, I thought Lincoln of Pennsylvania played, but they do not have that game listed for them, unfortunately, as a win-loss. And the information that I have actually, the information that I have, as you can see, even though Bowie State did not play, but Lincoln of Pennsylvania did. And this information comes directly from the CIAA's website. So I apologize for that, for not clearing that up on my end, because Lincoln of Pennsylvania did play, and unfortunately, they did lose. They lost to Grand Valley State University by a score of 45-7. And yes, as you can see, there was an error on their part, and I missed it. don't like missing stuff. But let's go with the games that will be played on this weekend. And these games are as follows. Valdosta State will travel to Johnson C. Smith. That's going to be a pretty good game, I would say. Johnson C. Smith had a great weekend this past weekend, winning. But when they play against Valdosta State, that's moving up just a little bit. One of the powers in Division II. And then you have Lincoln of Pennsylvania is going to go to Duquesne. I hope I'm pronouncing this school right. University in Pennsylvania. And that game is going to be played at noon as well. Bluefield will host Concord, and that's a 1:00 game. Shippensburg University will host Bowie State at 1 p.m. And then Hampton, coming off of a loss, getting ahead of myself, but hey, it is what it is, will host Elizabeth City at 6 o'clock. And that game will be played on Hampton's home turf. UNC Pembroke will play Fayetteville State at 6 p.m. at UNC's home. Allen will play host to Livingstone. Virginia State will travel to Norfolk State. And Winston-Salem will go down to Mars Hill University. These games will be played on Saturday, September 6th. Make sure, guys, you go and support your local HBCU, especially if you're a CIAA fan. If you graduated from a CIAA school, make sure you go and support these schools, because without your support, will anyone else support us? No. But next, SIAC. And again, we're just going to talk about the top 5 schools that were projected to finish in the top 5. And here they are again. Albany State, number 1. Clark Atlanta, number 2. Tuskegee, number 3. Miles College, number 4. And Fort Valley State. These were the teams that were projected to finish in the top 5 by the prognosticators for the SIAC. And with that being said, let's go ahead and move forward to the games that were played. And as you will see, the home teams had a good week, except for 2 games. But as I said, the home teams had a good week. Here, not all of them were SIAC games. Or should I say, not all of them were SIAC wins. But as you can see, the home teams, they fared pretty well in this weekend against the SIAC, and in some games like Albany State when they traveled to Shaw, which happens to be, as I mentioned earlier, a CIAA school, they were able to take it out on Shaw, being the number 1 predicted school to finish number 1 for the SIAC, so they held up their end of the bargain, winning 51-7. Next, Kentucky State held up their end against their main rival, Central State, defeating them by a score of 34-24. Valdosta State, the power of Division II, hosted Clark Atlanta. Now, even though Clark Atlanta ended up losing this game to Kentucky State, the one thing I must admit is that, doggone it, Clark Atlanta, they must be doing pretty well. Because guess what? They only lost to Valdosta State in Valdosta by 3 points. That tells me Valdosta State, even though they have a brand new coach this year, but yet and still, with Clark Atlanta traveling to Valdosta State, the team that played in the championship game for Division II last year, a lot of people might say, well, he still lost. But yet and still, they didn't get blown out like a lot of people would expect. And for Clark Atlanta to play as they did and only lose by 3, that says a lot for what Clark Atlanta has. Which means when Clark and Albany State ends up playing this year, I hope I have the opportunity to be at that game. If I don't, then I'm going to pay close attention to the game when it will be filmed, whether it's my buddy at Albany State, or whether it's HBCU Go, or whether it's ESPN. Either way, my eyes will be on that game when Clark and Albany State ends up playing, because that will be a great game. Now, as far as the rest of the games and the rest of the scores, here we are. Johnson C. Smith from the CIAA ended up winning, defeating Morehouse by a score of 45-10. Benedict, of course, as I mentioned earlier, defeated Fayetteville State 10-0. West Alabama hosted Fort Valley State and defeated Fort Valley State by a score of 27-17. Allen traveled to Morehead State, losing, close game, but losing by a score of 38-31. And Edward Waters traveled to Savannah State and defeating Savannah State by a score of 41-14. So you had two teams that played conference games. And, of course, in the Red Tails Classic, you had Tuskegee defeating Winston-Salem by a score of 20-17. And I'm hoping that I can pull up the remarks that were made by the coach from Tuskegee. I was able to catch him on the field, and the coach from Tuskegee, Coach James. Let's see if I am fortunate enough to pull up his comments, and if I am, I will play them for you if my computer cooperates with me. And I was hoping to have pulled up another clip, but I was unsuccessful in doing that one. But if I can get this to come up for you, then I'll get this going for you.
About to win.
Came out, sputtered a little bit. Second half, the guys toned in and just played ball. Defense gave us a lot in the second half. So, man, I'm proud of this team. Obviously, see what we can do again. So, I had something to say to Coach Massey. We gave him a hard ball win, but hey, we made sure that we followed everything, all the rules, and finished up strong in the league.
Thanks, Coach.
And that was Coach James from Tuskegee. It was a hard-fought game. As a matter of fact, Tuskegee had that game in the first quarter. Then Winston-Salem essentially kind of took over in that second quarter. In the third quarter, Tuskegee came back in that second half, and they had two quick hits. But then Winston-Salem just didn't go away. And then all of a sudden, with the score tied 17-all, Winston-Salem gave up 3 points, allowing Tuskegee to come out with a victory. They had lost the last two, if not three, Red Tails Classic games. They lost last year to Johnson C. Smith and the year before to Fort Valley State. And this year they finally came out on top, defeating Winston-Salem by a score of 20-10. As I said, it was a great game. It was a hard-fought defensive game. Each team had opportunities. There was a young man, I cannot remember his name, and because of this show and because being a coach, you don't want to put someone on blast, but this young man, he had many opportunities to catch the ball that literally hit him in the hand, which is the worst place for a wide receiver to have a ball thrown where it hits him in the hands. Because guess what? When it hit him in his hands, he dropped the ball. And unfortunately, Winston-Salem could have won that game, but because of mishaps like that, and the same thing happened to Tuskegee, but Winston-Salem unfortunately had more opportunities where their wideouts just dropped the ball. the quarterback was on target a lot of the times when he had time. But the wide receivers just did not help him out. Because instead of the score being 20-17, the game could have easily been 31-14, 31-17, possibly in favor of Winston-Salem. But woulda, coulda, shoulda, as they always say. And in this case, yeah, it was one of those games where they could have won, but they didn't. And with that being said, let's go take a look at the standings for the SIAC. And here you are. And for the standings, you have Kentucky State. Of course, they defeated Central State. Their big rivalry game there. And so Kentucky State and Edward Waters are sitting on top on the conference. But as you can see, Kentucky State, Edward Waters, Albany State, Benedict, and Tuskegee all won in the conference, whereas Lane is the only team that did not have a game in the conference, whereas Miles, Savannah State, Allen, Fort Valley, Morehouse, Central, and Clark Atlanta all lost, unfortunately. But I will say this much. Out of the teams that lost, Clark Atlanta, you're sitting pretty good. That's all I have to say. Clark Atlanta, you are sitting pretty good. And the team that you lost to, all I have to say is this. By you losing to them, by that score, 3 points, by Clark Atlanta losing to the Valdosta State, I know I'm going on and on and on about that, but I'm seeing nothing but positive things that can happen to Clark Atlanta for the rest of the season, because they played a whale of a game against them. But let's take a look at the games that will be played next week. And here we are. Games that are coming up for the SIAC on the weekend of September 6th. And as you can see, Albany State will travel to Kentucky State. That's going to be a good conference game right there. Even though Kentucky State, they won this past weekend, they may be able to hold their own, but Albany State, they are returning a lot of starters on offense and defense. I don't see Kentucky State being successful. So sorry about that. Clark Atlanta will play host to Florida Memorial. Lane will host Lincoln of Mississippi, and that game will be in Tennessee. Edward Waters will host Miles. Livingstone will travel to Allen. Shorter will travel to Savannah State. And Tuskegee will play host to Central State. So you have 3 conference games that will be played next week. And, of course, you have one game, Edward Waters and Miles, that will be played on ESPN+. And also you have Central State. That game will be on the Griot. More than likely that game will be on HBCU Go. And, guys, make sure you watch those games. Make sure you support those schools, and make sure you go out, watch, and support, and tell your friends, even tell your enemies, go out and watch those games. Now, for the MEAC, guys, I know we had some big names coming into the MEAC, and a lot of people will look at these first few games and say, these teams aren't as good as we thought they were going to be with these new head coaches. The season is young, and the more these coaches get these players to gel with each other, it's going to be a different story. Now, as I said, I'm only going to take a quick look at each conference's projected order of finish. And this will probably be the last time. So with the MEAC, here we are. And with the MEAC, you had South Carolina State in first, followed by North Carolina Central, Morgan State, Norfolk State, Howard, and, of course, Delaware State. And with those schools, this is how they fared on this weekend. You had a lot of eyes on Norfolk State and Delaware State. Deshaun Watson is at Dell State. Michael Vick is at Norfolk State. So you had lots and lots of eyes on those two schools. And actually, for those two schools, they ended up playing on Thursday night. So they had all the eyes focused on them, those two teams, on one night, and the rest of the teams played on this past Saturday. But for those two teams, this past Thursday, unfortunately, they didn't have a great showing. I would say Delaware State had a better showing than Norfolk State, because Norfolk State played at home. Delaware State was on the road. And I personally say that Dell State, they did a lot better. But we'll see what happens this weekend that's coming up. But for the games, and let's go and talk about the scores. Now, as you can see, Townsend traveled to Norfolk State, and they ended up winning by a score of 27-7. They being Norfolk State, were only able to muster up 7 points in that game, but the defense gave up 27. Whereas Delaware State played Dell State, or should I say Delaware, University of Delaware. They gave up 35 points, but their offense were able to score 17. So Delaware State had a little bit more success, I would say, in this game as opposed to Norfolk State against their opponent. But we'll see how each team fares this upcoming week. And as you can see, for the rest of the scores, Howard was able to eke out a victory against Florida A&M. And that score was 10-9 in the Orange Blossom Classic. And a lot of people were glad to see Florida A&M make it back down to Miami to participate in the Orange Blossom Classic. But unfortunately, they were not able to eke out a victory. The last victory that Florida A&M had of great significance was when they defeated Jackson State. And they went on to win the SWAC title that year. And as well as the, if I'm not mistaken, not only the SWAC title, but they were also able to win the Celebration Bowl. Other games that were played on Saturday, August 30th, in the MEAC, New Hampshire traveled to North Carolina Central, and with New Hampshire ended up pulling out a victory by a score of 27-10. South Carolina State eked out a victory 16-15 over Wofford, and Morgan State traveled to South Alabama and ended up losing by a score of 38-21. And even though these were considered, some of these games were considered possibly a money game, the Delaware game, but the others, these were just good games played by Division I schools. It will be interesting to see when they get in the conference how well these teams, just like I said earlier, how well these teams gel, how well they play together, and what happens in the meantime. Because South Carolina State, they're picking up where they left off from. They ended up winning their first game. It was a close game, 16-15, but guess what? They ended up winning. North Carolina Central, even though they lost, they're 1-1. So they are still in the hunt. Now, as we take a look at the standings for the MEAC, you have Howard on top, along with South Carolina State, with a record of 1-0. Granted, this is week 1. But when we take a look at things, this is significant, because North Carolina Central is sitting back. All of these games are non-conference, but North Carolina Central is sitting back with a 1-1 record. Of course, having defeated a SWAC school in the MEAC/SWAC Challenge. And with that being the case, having defeated Southern University in the MEAC/SWAC Challenge, they're 1-1. So their non-conference schedule, so far, so good. But they'll have a challenge again next week. But as you can see, everyone else, Dell State, Morgan, and Norfolk State, 0-1. Now let's take a look at the games that will be played next week. And games that will be played next week by the MEAC. You have Albany traveling to Delaware State. That's the 1 o'clock game, and these games will be played on September 6th. Next, Howard University will travel to Temple. That's a 2 p.m. game, and that game will be seen on ESPN Plus, as well as North Carolina Central's game against Old Dominion at 6 p.m. Virginia State will then travel to Norfolk State, and that game is at 6 p.m. in Norfolk, Virginia. And we will see how well Virginia State plays against a Division II school. Now, the one thing I will say is that the CIAA, and especially the SIAC, they have had success against the MEAC and the SWAC schools. So it'll be interesting to see whether or not Virginia State can not only hold their own, but to see whether or not they can pull off an upset against Norfolk State. Now, a lot of people might say, if they being Norfolk State ends up losing to Virginia State, that's going to be a huge loss. Now, for the in-state rival, a lot of people will say, oh, get rid of coach already. But you got to understand, Virginia State is also a power in Division II. Miles College beat Alabama State last year. So guess what? This can also happen. You've also had other SIAC schools and other Division II schools beat other HBCU schools. So don't be surprised if Virginia State ends up defeating this school. So if Norfolk State ends up losing to Virginia State, don't get your panties in a bunch, because it can happen. It can happen. So don't try to find the nearest bridge. Don't get upset. Don't kick your dog or anything like that, because it can happen. Now, for other scores, South Carolina State will travel to the University of South Carolina. So the Gamecocks will host South Carolina State. That's going to be a huge challenge for Coach Berry. And then Towson will then travel to Morgan State. And we'll see what kind of team Morgan State is going to field against Towson, who won last week. And they're on the road again for the second weekend in a row. And we'll see how well they play again. They defeated Norfolk last week, and now they ended up playing Morgan State. Interesting. But I'm not going to say anything, because all of a sudden, could this just be conference to conference play or potential? I doubt it. But no, let's not move too far ahead. But these are the games that are going to be played next week by the MEAC. Now, last but not least, the SWAC conference. Now, I was at the game for Jackson State and Hampton. Jackson State had not defeated Hampton University in their first 3 meetings. But it was, as I went back and I looked at the games and the years that Jackson State played, we had a coach, and that was during a really dark time for Jackson State. We were really going through it between 2004 and 2008. And I had a guy that was actually at my tent for my pregame show, one of the former players, Derek Mitchell, who was at my tent. And he indicated that the coach we had at that time, I'm not going to talk about Coach Bell too much, but he mentioned that he almost single-handedly destroyed Jackson State football. And he really did. And during that period is during the time that we actually played Hampton. And Hampton really took it to us during that time. And a lot of people were saying, well, hell, you didn't beat us then, so why do you think we're going to beat you? You're going to beat us now. A much different team, much different coaching philosophy, different culture, and not only that, but we are the black national champions of college football. Those were the things that were riding on this game for Jackson State. Not to take anything away from Hampton, but as far as Jackson State was concerned, they had too much riding on this game to lose. And they came in playing like champions. And let's talk about how the game ended up. But the prognosticators for the SWAC, this is how everyone saw or everyone believed that this conference will end up. Jackson State on top in the East, followed by Florida A&M and Alabama State. Next in the West, Southern, followed by Alcorn and Prairie View. And then, of course, Texas Southern. But, as I said, let's now dig into the scores for the SWAC conference. And games that were played on Thursday night. Before I get into this one, Northwestern State had not won, and if I'm not mistaken, and I should go, let me go ahead and take the time, and I did not pull this up because I too was somewhat disgusted with this. But the one thing I can say more than anything else, it was a very surprising game, to say the least. And for them, for them being Alcorn, to play this team and not win was very upsetting. And last year, I can easily say, and I'm going back, they were essentially annihilated in pretty much all of their games from last year. And they did not win a game last year. One game they were defeated by South Alabama by a score of 87-10. That's 87, 8-7 to 10. So, unbelievable. And they were not successful in winning any games over the past 2 years. As I go back and look, and the last game that they won was November 5th, 2022, defeating East Texas A&M. That was their last victory in any football game. November of 2022. And now they were hosting Alcorn State University, a team that was projected to finish number 2 in the SWAC. And as I said, they were coming and playing a team, Alcorn, playing a team that hadn't won a game since 2022. Why do I bring this up? Because as I said, I was actually hurt, even though this is a rival of Alcorn. Alcorn is a rivalry team against Jackson State. But how can you lose this game? The game was so bad for Alcorn. They showed one of the scores that Northwestern State was able to accomplish. Alcorn back to punt the ball. The ball slips through the hands of the punter. The punter then tries to recover the ball, but what he tries to do is kick the ball out of the end zone. Now, I know most of you old heads may remember this. When Garo Upremium, a kicker for the Miami Dolphins way back in the 70s. And also, I can't remember the other guy's name for the New York Giants who also whiffed at a kick when he tried to kick it out. But you've had multiple players, multiple punters who tried to kick the ball away or kick it out of bounds or kick it out of the back of the end zone and whiffed, and the other team picks it up and runs it in for a touchdown. Guess what happens? Alcorn punter misses the ball, slips through his hands. He turns around, tries to recover the ball, but he kicks it, tries to kick the ball out of the end zone. He whiffs, misses it. Guy from Northwestern picks up the ball, runs it in for a touchdown. This was on ESPN. It was just that bad. And one of the players from Alcorn was just so pissed off. He pushed on his own player, the punter. Like, what are you doing? Just fall on the ball. That's all he had to do. In other words, more than likely the defense could have held Northwestern's football team. But what happened is that he did not do that. And he decided to try to kick the ball out the end zone. So instead of giving up 6, which was perhaps on his mind, he ended up giving up 6 by allowing them to score the touchdown and inevitably losing the game by a score of 20-10 to a team that had not won since 2022. And to be more specific, and when was that game again? That they finally won one? September. Oh, I'm sorry. It was September. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm looking at scores again. November 5th. November 5th, 2022. There you go, Alcorn. Now, for the other game that was played on Thursday night, so I'm sorry I went into a diatribe there, but that game was just so upsetting to me. I just could not believe that Alcorn lost that game to Northwestern. But that's a game that a lot of teams schedule that they consider one of those automatic wins. Not today. At least that's what Alcorn feels. Now, with this loss for Alcorn, let's see who's on the schedule for next weekend. But let's talk about the other games that were played in the SWAC. And for Alabama State, let me say this about Alabama State: their quarterback, and I can't remember his name. I think it's Body. But for Alabama State, they are playing pretty decent ball. Now, they ended up losing that game, I should say. And with them losing that game, that was kind of interesting for them. And the quarterback, his last name is Body. That's what I thought. And he ended up only having 119 yards. 1 touchdown. But for what he did, he ended up playing pretty decent. Now, as I said, he only ended up I'm sorry. He rushed himself. He rushed for 119 yards and 1 touchdown. But what he did overall, he accounted for 5 of their touchdowns. 1 touchdown on the ground, 119 yards rushing. And he threw for 312 yards, 18 of 24 passing yards, 18 of 24. pass attempts. This guy is off the chain. Now, they are ranked number 2 in the East. I mean, number 3 in the East behind Jackson State and Florida A&M. I will say this. They played the University of Alabama, Birmingham. They're not a bad team. UAB is not a bad team. They're not a slouch. And you're telling me that Alabama State, and during the game, they had a lead during the game. And with that being said, looking at what they're able to do and what they did against this team, that tells me a lot about the possibility of what they are going to do in the SWAC. The game of the SWAC, the game of the year for the SWAC, will be at Jackson State October 11th, regardless of the record, when Alabama State travels to Jackson State for Jackson State's homecoming. What a hell of a homecoming game that's going to be. And there were times when Alabama State actually had the lead, and they relinquished it. The game actually went back and forth between Alabama State and UAB, University of Alabama, Birmingham. That tells you the kind of team that Alabama State has. Now, if they had a slightly better defense, all I have to say is this, guys. Everybody else in the SWAC, if your defensive backs are not decent, if your defensive line can't get to the quarterback, the 42 points that they scored against UAB, that might be their average. And what I mean by their average, Alabama State. Now, let's go ahead and look at the rest of the scores. Because as I said, Alabama State ended up losing to UAB 52-42. And that bodes well for Alabama State, because that means their offense is clicking already. Now, Bethune-Cookman, as you can see, lost to Florida International University. Now, that was a reunion of a former coach for Florida A&M. And Florida A&M and Bethune-Cookman. Coach Simmons, former coach of Florida A&M. And he went to Duke, coached at Duke, and now he's at Florida International. And I guess he said, welcome back, old friend, but I'm going to beat you like I beat you before. And that's essentially what he did, coaching at Florida International, defeating Bethune-Cookman, as you can see, by a score of 42-9. Now, other games that were played this past Saturday in the SWAC. And we talked about Jackson State hosting Hampton University. And I was able to interview several Hampton fans, and they were not expecting to win. They were expecting for a good showing. They were expecting for a good showing. Some of the guys were saying, yeah, we're going to win because we've beaten you guys before, so what's going to be the difference today? And even though one guy, he did say that, but what his goal was to come to see the Sonic Boom. And the Boom put on a show. They did not disappoint. So thank you very much to the Boom. Now, for the scores and the games that were played on this past Saturday. Jackson State defeated Hampton University 28-14. Florida A&M lost to Howard. Close game. And Howard pulled that game out in the end. Alabama A&M, money game, losing to the University of Arkansas by a score of 52-7. Southern traveled to Itta Bena to play Mississippi Valley State. This game was close at the beginning. Then all of a sudden, Southern pulled away. But when it came to the end, Valley almost pulled this victory out against Southern, losing only by 5 points to Southern University by a score of 34-29. This lets me know that Coach Buckley has already changed the culture and the belief system of this Mississippi Valley State team. Now, out of all the teams in the conference, all of them, the East Division and the West, the East Division is going to be very difficult to deal with. Because when Valley gets themselves right, Alabama State with what they did, Jackson State coming out on top against a great non-conference foe. Dude, the East is going to be tough. Unfortunately, I see the only team that will not have a shot in the East will be Bethune-Cookman. And if Florida A&M doesn't watch it, they could be 5-6 with Mississippi Valley climbing over the top of them. I say be careful. Be very careful, because that could happen. But let's continue with the scores. As I said, Southern fortunate enough to leave Itta with a victory 34-29. Another money game. This game got out of hand really quick. Arkansas Pine Bluff 7, Texas Tech 67. Grambling hosted Langston. Grambling won that game by a score of 55-7. And Prairie View nipped out Texas Southern in the end by a score of 22-21. That was a great conference game there. Now, for the standings in the SWAC, of course, there was only one SWAC game, and that was between rivals, in-state rivals, like you say, almost say in-city rivals, Prairie View and Texas Southern. And this year, Prairie View ended up on top, and as you can see in the West, taking a one-game lead in the conference in the West. But Jackson State is the only team to win in the East Division. But let me tell you, folks, I'm looking at Alabama State. They're going to be hell to deal with. I'm also looking at Mississippi Valley State. Those are my two surprise teams in the SWAC. Jackson State is on top right now. But those are two teams that I believe in this conference we have to watch out for. In the West, I'm sorry, folks. Grambling could have a good team, but they play Langston. We will find out next week when they go on the road. They have a juggernaut that they're playing against. And we'll get to that in a few seconds. But Southern, I felt that the team that I saw Southern put on the field against North Carolina Central, I felt that Southern was going to have a better display of football when they got in the conference play. But based upon their play against Mississippi Valley State, now guess what? Valley brought in quite a few new players. But at the same time, for Southern to play like they played, the West may not be as strong as I thought the West would be. And I think all of the power resides in the East. Southern was fortunate to come out of that game with a victory. Early in the second, late in the second, early in the third quarter, I thought Southern was getting ready to pull away in that game, and then Valley came back. It's going to be interesting, folks. That's all I got to say for the rest of the year in the SWAC conference. And if you are a SWAC fan, This is going to be a hell of a year. All I got to say is hold on and watch these games. All of the conferences are going to be great, but just hold on and just watch these games, and it's just going to be a great year for football. Now let's take a look at the games that will be played in the SWAC conference. And these games are as follows. As I said, Grambling, they are now playing the number 1 team in the nation after Ohio State defeated the University of Texas in the Horseshoe. Now, Grambling will now travel to play Ohio State. And that game is 2:30. And they will be playing them on this upcoming Saturday. I doubt if Grambling, I'm sorry. And look, folks, I'm HBCU through and through, but I'm sorry. I don't see Grambling may end up scoring 7 if they put in if Ohio State put in a third string team. I don't know what type of team Grambling has this year. They ended up scoring 55 against Langston. They could have easily 55 points scored against them by the third quarter. It depends on how much Ohio State pulled the reins in this game. First quarter is going to be rough. I just hope Grambling can hold their own. If Coach Eddie Robinson was there, or if this was a Coach Eddie Robinson team, the original Eddie Robinson, it would probably be a different game. But he ain't there. So, folks, it's going to be a tough game. Just hold on. Next, Jackson State travels to USM. USM took it on the chin this past week, losing to Mississippi State. And with Jackson State holding their own and playing pretty good ball, it'll be interesting to see how well Jackson State matches up against USM. And if Jackson State defeats USM, who's to say, depending on how that game ends up between Jackson State and Alabama State, Jackson State would have an opportunity to go undefeated. And I don't recall, I might be wrong, I will have to call my uncle, but I don't recall a year that Jackson State has ever gone undefeated. But I believe if they defeat USM, Jackson State will have an opportunity to have their first undefeated season, possibly in years or ever. But we shall see. And next, other games. Texas Southern travels to the University of California in Berkeley. Florida A&M travels to Florida Atlantic to play them in Boca Raton, Florida. UAPB will play Central Arkansas. Prairie View will host the University of Texas Rio Grande Valley at 6 p.m. in Prairie View. Alabama State will now play Southern. This is a game that I'm actually looking forward to seeing. Alabama State playing Southern. And this will tell me the type of team that Alabama State has, as well as Southern. Because after what I saw against North Carolina Central, I just said Central just had a better team, period. Better team, better coach. I'm sorry. But Coach Robinson with Alabama State and what he did this past weekend will tell me a lot about Alabama State. So it'll be interesting to see whether or not Alabama State can hold their own or defeat Southern in Baton Rouge. There are very few teams that can go into Mumford Stadium and defeat Southern University. And if Alabama State can go into Mumford Stadium and defeat Southern, I'm going to go on the record, folks, and I'm going to say this. Southern 20, Alabama State 35. I repeat, Southern 20, Alabama State 35. In the game that will be played on September 6th. That's my prediction for this particular game. I might be totally dead wrong, and Alabama State may get the crap beat out of them by Southern. But we shall see how close I am to being right about this team and their offense. Body accounted for 5 touchdowns. And if they are unable to hold him, stop him, Southern was not able to stop the quarterback for North Carolina Central. I was not able to see the game against Mississippi Valley. But I know they were not able to contain the quarterback for North Carolina Central. And if Body is anything close to close to the guy from North Carolina Central, Southern is going to be eaten alive. That's all I have to say. Other games in the SWAC. Mississippi Valley State travels to Tarleton State University. That game is going to be played in Stevensville, Texas. Alcorn will travel to Alabama A&M. That's a win for Alabama A&M. I'm sorry, folks. I shouldn't be saying this about about Alcorn, but after what Alcorn did against Alabama A&M, you got to show me something at Alcorn. You got to show me something. Because the fans at Alcorn, I can tell you right now, the fans at Alcorn, Coach, if you don't show me something for Alcorn, Coach Thomas, let me tell you something. Those fans at Alcorn, they're going to find the nearest U-Haul, and they're going to make sure it's parked in front of your house with the door open and saying, pack furniture here. They don't believe in losing seasons, just like Jackson State, Grambling, and a lot of other schools in the SWAC. We don't believe in losing. They are my rival. Alcorn is a rival team for against Jackson State, but I got lots of family that have gone to Alcorn, and even I don't want to see Alcorn losing, except when they play Jackson State. But at the same time, Coach Thomas, if you don't win, and this is a rough season for you, we're going to see what happens with your contract. So hopefully you're able to pull out a victory or come awful doggone close to beating Alabama State at Alabama State. And the last game, Bethune will travel to the University of Miami. Now, this is going to be, unfortunately, as much as I hate to say it, this is going to be another beatdown for Bethune-Cookman. It can be very disheartening when you do go to these games and you play these teams and you have no chance of winning. It can be demoralizing to a team. And when Bethune goes to the University of Miami, they just played Notre Dame. Notre Dame was a team that just played in the national championship game this past football season against Ohio State. And the University of Miami, granted, each new year is a new team. I understand that. But the University of Miami, the U, just defeated Notre Dame. But yet and still, here Bethune is going against the U in Miami. So all I have to say is to the players, to the fans, to the students, to the alums of Bethune-Cookman, just hang on. The conference schedule will be coming up soon. And hopefully, with the conference schedule, you will see a better product being placed on the field. Because I can tell you now, with these games that are coming up, the last game that you played, that you ended up losing, unfortunately, against Florida International, against Coach Simmons, a former coach in the SWAC, that at the time the only team that he lost to was to Jackson State until he overcame that one game and finally beat Jackson State and went on to the Celebration Bowl and won. And he came back and, of course, defeated you, Bethune-Cookman. So, Coach Woody, all I have to say to you is this. I hope that you are able to bounce back after you play the U and then get your team's head back into the game of playing football, because these two games, yeah, they're going to be kind of tough. Grambling, when you play Ohio State in the Horseshoe, it's going to be a tough game. Jackson State, I will say this to you. I look forward to seeing this game and hoping that out of all the games that are being played, that in these first two non-conference games that you are successful. You were successful in the first against Hampton. Now, USM, having come off of a loss against Mississippi State, that is going to be a very tough game in Hattiesburg, because USM is not looking to lose a second game. That I can tell you. And they are not expecting to lose against you. And if they end up losing, then that a lot is going to be on that game. A lot is going to be riding on that game. And you may have some hometown calls made by the referee. So not only will you be playing 11 on the field, but you may also be playing against them and others. So with all of this, guys, being said, everything that's being done, all the games that are being played, all I have to say is this. Please keep your eyes and your ears open for this coming weekend, because we will have a pregame show unless we are going to be producing another game for another team. So we will let you know by no later than tomorrow where we will be and what we will be doing. So may God bless you. May God keep you, and make sure of all of the things that take place, that you support your HBCU, because if you don't give, it's a guarantee no one else will support us. Make sure you go out and support your HBCU by buying season tickets. Buy season tickets. Football, basketball, baseball. I'm going to go, and like I used to, because a lot of you guys know I used to coach track and field. Had a chance to talk to the track coach this past this past weekend. So guess what I'm going to do? Not only did I buy season tickets for the football team, but I'm going to start giving back to the track team for Jackson State University. So I didn't run track. I should have run track for Jackson State. But the one thing I say to you is this. Give. Join the Alumni Association for your HBCU. If you have a child attending an HBCU, you can still join as an associate member and be a part of their national alumni chapter. So be a part of their National Alumni Association. Join the local chapter and be an active member. Support your HBCU. And guys, with all of that being said, keep your eyes and ears open for where we will be this upcoming weekend. And with all of that being said, may God bless you. May God keep you. And we look forward to seeing you this upcoming weekend. So may God bless you. And I will talk with you very soon.